Ready for a deep dive today? We're really going to crack open this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
Oh, I like this one. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's got a lot of really interesting ideas.
Mm.
And it's not about being a jerk or anything.
No, not at all.
It's more like, how do we figure out what actually matters
Uh,
so we can, not sweat the small stuff?
right. What's worth our energy and what can we just let go of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he starts off with this guy, Charles Bukowski, kind of this legendary rough around the edges poet, novelist.
Yeah.
But his writing really took off when he just owned being a loser.
Mm-hmm.
That was his thing.
Yeah, he just embraced his own style.
It makes you think, right? What if we stop trying to be perfect all the time?
Yeah, what if we just embrace those imperfections?
Exactly.
And that's a lot of what this don't try philosophy is, which is a little counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
But he talks about this thing, the backwards law, where, the more you chase after happiness directly.
It's like that thing, don't think about a pink elephant, and then that's all you can think about.
That's a great way to put it. So, if you're always focusing on how you don't have happiness, your brain is just going to latch on to that lack.
That makes sense.
Like scrolling through social media and seeing these, perfect lives, and then you feel worse, right?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Right? So it's by always striving for this, ideal happiness,
We'll end up less happy.
you might be making yourself more miserable. So then he introduces this concept, and it's kind of his funny way of explaining this, but the disappointment panda.
Okay, the disappointment panda. I like it already.
It's brilliant, right? And it's basically this idea that we need to stop running from the hard stuff, the negative emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're kind of conditioned to just avoid them at all costs.
Right. Put on a happy face, yeah.
But they're there for a reason, right? They're trying to tell us something.
So disappointment panda's like, hey, pay attention. Those expectations you have, maybe they're not so realistic.
Exactly. And instead of just shoving those feelings down, what if we just sat with them for a minute?
Yeah, that's tough, though.
It is tough. It's way easier said than done. But often, that's how we grow.
It's becoming more aware of those emotions and what they're trying to tell us.
Yeah, becoming better interpreters of our own emotions.
Instead of letting them just control us.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that kind of leads into, I think, one of his bigger points, which is this. Happiness isn't the opposite of struggle. It's born from it.
What do you mean?
So think about lifting weights. It's hard, right?
Yeah.
You're uncomfortable. You might be sore the next day, but that struggle is what makes you stronger.
Yeah, no pain, no gain.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And Manson's saying this applies to other stuff too, not just the gym. Sticking with a creative project, having a tough conversation, facing a fear. It's in those moments where we push through the discomfort that we often find the good stuff.
So it's not like every struggle equals happiness. It's more like being mindful of the struggles we choose.
Yes. Because avoiding them altogether, that can lead to a different kind of suffering,
I can see that. So we're not just signing up for a life of misery,
Yeah.
right? There's got to be more to it than that.
Right. It's not about just loving struggle for the sake of it.
Okay, good. Because that sounds kind of rough.
Yeah. He actually talks a lot about values and how that plays into all this.
Okay, so it's not just about not caring about anything. It's more nuanced.
Exactly. It's about choosing what you do care about, really being intentional with it.
I like that. And this is where he gets into self-esteem, which I think is really interesting. Because we're always told, believe in yourself, you're amazing.
Right. Self-esteem is everything.
Right. But Manson's like, hold on a minute. What if this whole self-esteem push has actually backfired?
It's funny because it kind of makes sense when you think about it. We've created this culture where everyone's supposed to feel good about themselves all the time, whether they've earned it or not.
And he uses that example of Jimmy, right? The wannabe entrepreneur. What was his deal again?
Oh, Jimmy. Yeah, he's the poster child for what happens with inflated self-esteem, but no real substance behind it. He's all talk, no action.
Always got an excuse.
Oh, totally. Blaming everyone but himself for why things aren't working out.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap, don't you think? Especially with social media and everything. It's you're constantly comparing yourself to these curated versions of other people.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recipe for feeling inadequate. And this is where Manson throws another curveball. He's embrace mediocrity.
Embrace mediocrity. Wait, what? Nobody wants to be mediocre.
I know, right? It sounds kind of harsh at first. But what he means is, look, none of us can be exceptional at everything.
Yeah, that's true.
We all have our strengths. We have our weaknesses, things we're passionate about, and things we're just meh about.
Yeah, I'm never going to be a brain surgeon, and that's okay.
Exactly. And by accepting that we're going to be kind of average at a lot of things, it takes the pressure off. You free up so much mental energy to focus on the stuff that actually matters to you.
So it's not about settling for a boring life. It's just about being more intentional.
Yeah. Yes. It's about choosing where you want to excel, where you want to put your energy.
Okay. So we're not just talking about like sitting on the couch and doing nothing with our lives. It's more about like picking your battles.
Exactly. And that actually leads into this really fascinating story he tells about a guy named Hiru Onoda. Have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, the Japanese soldier who kept fighting World War II, like way after it was over, right?
Yeah. He was hiding out in the jungle for like decades.
Decades. Seriously. But how?
He was convinced the war was still going on even after he found leaflets and stuff like dropped by the U.S. military. He just refused to believe it.
Wow. That's like next level commitment to a cause.
Right. And it's an extreme example, obviously, but it shows how powerful our beliefs can be, even when maybe they're not serving us anymore.
So what's the lesson there? That we should just give up on our values altogether.
No, not at all. But it's about constantly questioning those values, making sure they're still in line with who we are and what we want.
So being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Exactly. Like
Ah.
our values can change and evolve as we grow, and that's okay.
Okay, so questioning our values, making sure they're still working for us, I like that. But it's not always easy to spot those moments
Yeah.
when they're not. Right?
No, it can be tough. It takes some serious self-awareness.
And this is where he gets into that whole fault versus responsibility thing, which I'll admit I was a little fuzzy on at first.
Yeah, it's easy to get those mixed up.
But it's actually pretty important when you really think about it.
It is. So fault is like, who's to blame?
Right, okay.
But responsibility is about, even if something's not your fault, you still have a choice in how you respond to it.
Oh, okay, so like, yeah, someone cuts you off in traffic, not your fault.
Right. But you get to choose whether you're going to, like, lay on the horn and yell or just take a deep breath and move on.
Okay, yeah. So how do we actually do that? Because it's easy to say take a deep breath, but like road rage is real.
Oh, for sure. It takes practice. But it goes back to those values, right? Like, what kind of person do you want to be in that moment?
That's a good point. And he uses this kind of crazy example to illustrate it, remember? Like, what if someone left a baby on your doorstep?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're not at fault for that situation,
Right. You didn't do anything wrong.
but you're suddenly responsible.
It's a big responsibility, right? Like, what happens to that baby is now on you to some extent.
Whoa. Okay, so that's kind of heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. And he doesn't shy away from the heavy stuff, does he? He talks about, like, genetics and trauma and this whole victimhood chic thing, which honestly made me a little uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's a fine line to walk, right?
Because obviously, yeah, bad stuff happens.
Yeah.
And it does affect us.
Absolutely. Our experiences shape us.
But he's also saying we don't have to let those experiences define us.
Right. There's a difference between acknowledging the impact of something and letting it completely control your life.
So how do we find that balance?
It's not easy, but it goes back to that responsibility piece, right? You can acknowledge, okay, this thing happened, it sucked, it still affects me. But then you get to decide, okay, what now?
We're not powerless,
Right. We always have a choice.
even if it doesn't feel like it.
Even if it doesn't feel like it. And sometimes the bravest choice is to say no.
Setting boundaries.
Yes. With ourselves, with other people. Like Manson uses this really interesting example. He talks about Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet. Wait, really? What do they have to do with boundaries?
Well, think about it. They were so like head over heels in love,
yeah,
right?
like madly in love.
But they had zero boundaries. And look how that turned out. Not great.
Not great at all.
Right. Tragedy. So he's using that as an example of, like, even in romantic relationships, you have to have boundaries. You can't lose yourself completely in another person.
Yeah, I actually really like that take on Romeo and Juliet because it's so easy to romanticize that story.
Oh, for sure. But in real life, that level of intensity is not sustainable.
And this is where he gets into commitment, right? Which seems a little counterintuitive because we're always told don't settle, keep your options open.
Right. But Manson's like, what if the real magic is in the commitment? Like, when you really go all in on something, that's when you find the true rewards.
Deeper meaning.
Yes. Whether it's with a partner, a career, a creative pursuit.
So it's not about being afraid to commit. It's about being more mindful about what we choose to commit to.
Exactly. And he even talks about his own life, how he used to be all about, like, traveling the world, being a digital nomad.
Oh, yeah, he talks about that.
But it wasn't until he really committed to his writing, to his relationship, that he found that deeper level of satisfaction.
So it's not about closing ourselves off to new experiences. It's just about recognizing that sometimes saying no to some things allows us to say a bigger yes to something else, something that really matters.
Exactly. And this is where the book takes a really interesting turn, I think, because he gets into this whole thing about death.
Yeah. He talks about his friend Josh, who passed away,
Hmm.
and it really made him think about like what really matters in life.
Right. Like, none of us are going to get out of here alive. So, what do we want to do with the time that we have?
It's about legacy. Right.
And he talks about this idea of immortality projects, which sounds kind of intense,
It sounds intense.
but it's basically like the things we do to feel like we're leaving a mark on the world.
So like having kids.
Yeah, or like building a business, creating art, writing a book.
Trying to make a difference somehow.
Exactly. It's like this innate human desire to like transcend our own mortality. And often those projects are tied to our deepest values.
So what happens when those projects are shaken or those values are questioned?
That can be a real crisis of meaning for people. And Manson talks about this really powerful moment where he's standing at the edge of a cliff in South Africa, just contemplating his own mortality.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part.
And it's terrifying, right, but also kind of freeing in a way.
Because it puts everything in perspective.
Exactly. It makes you realize that our time here is precious and limited. So what are we going to do with it? What are we going to give a fuck about?
Wow. This has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
The subtle art of not giving a feck. It's a really good reminder that it's not about being, like, heartless or indifferent. It's about being more intentional with our energy, our attention, our time.
Choosing our battles wisely and recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just let go.
Let go of the things that don't serve us.
Exactly. The things that are holding us back from really living a life that's true to ourselves.
I like that. A life that's true to ourselves. Well, that about wraps up this deep dive. Hopefully everyone listening has something to think about, maybe even some new tools to try out in their own lives.
I hope so too.
And hey, if you're trying to figure out what you should and shouldn't give a feck about, this book might just help you out. Until next time, keep those values in check, choose your battles wisely, and remember, you get to decide what matters most to you.